This shockwave brought a lot of volatility.
Warren Buffett, what does his confidence in Japan tell us? How will the Osaka World Expo boost tourism?
Mixing in a very specific way technology and traditions.
How do we believe that the tightening will affect Japan's economy?
He's an admirer of what Abe did in Japan.
Welcome to Merill Talks. Today we're joined by Marc El-Lazidi and we'll be talking about the Japanese economy. Marc, how will the Osaka World Expo boost tourism as well as international investment?
Hi everyone. Yes, Mike. We hope this time Japan is quite lucky because last time they tried to organize a big expo, which was the Olympic of 2020, COVID came. And they couldn't really push on that side. But since that, a lot of things happened, and especially also the trajectory of the yen. The yen was quite weak, boosting the tourism. But I think the message of the Japanese government here is to say, okay, we are being funding a lot of money in US, in Europe, and also in Southeast Asia. And this is also the time for you that as a vitrine, you need to invest also in Japan because, like I say, the foreign indirect investments have been quite low or going only in the direction from Japan to Europe to US. So really clearly here is to see Japan has back on growth because, as we know, for decades and decades, the GDP was quite low. But this time is like, okay, we are ready. We are quite, I will say, technological advance. This is what is interesting about Japan because it's a civilization, a society who's mixing in a very specific way technology and traditions, very different the way we are doing here in Europe. I will say they are quite advanced on certain things. I'll give you a small example. The GSM was not active in Japan for many years. So if you have been coming with your mobile, you couldn't even get the network. So they have their own I will say, ecosystem.
And in fact, Marc, for decades now, Japan has had more of an accommodative policy. And how do we believe that the tightening will affect Japan's economy?
Yes, I think it's an interesting thing. And I think we can, for our audience, maybe put on the screen where do we stand and what are the developed countries where they stand. Yes, Japan was a pioneer on quantitative easing that was being used quite a lot, especially during the pandemic time. So to put like the economy back on the track from US to Europe. But Japan, interestingly enough, is at the other side of the spectrum. We know that recently Switzerland cut the rate. Canada also did in an aggressive way. We know, for example, Canada is doing it because of the trade war. Trump was pushing a lot of pressure on his neighbor, which is Mexico and Canada. And Switzerland, been interestingly enough, the transition about Switzerland and Japan, Switzerland is quite afraid about something, a word, it's called deflation. So the opposite inflations. I think central bank, they know how to fight inflations, but central bank has a problem how to fight deflation. Japan was in this position for nearly 30 years. We call them like lost decade. I mean, it's quite think because you go to a supermarket, you want to buy something like bread, for example, and every year the bread is cheaper and cheaper. It's creating quite a scary approach. We can think, yes, it's good because not. But the point, it's like your money is depreciating and your purchasing power too.
So, Marc, jumping onto inflation and growth, what will be the effects of Japan's reforms?
I think it's an interesting time. As you know, Japan not long time ago was second in line. I mean, as the biggest economy in the world. As we know now, the rank is like number one US, second China, and third Japan. I think Japan is in a good situation. Abe, Prime Minister, one of the longest Prime Ministers who served, have been putting the Abenomic. And it's interesting because Scott Bessent, who is the new US Treasury Secretary, is a big fan of Abenomic. So what Abe was putting in place as a prime minister, he was reforming deeply and structurally Japan. Now, Japan is not always the spectrum. I will say the spectrum is large in the way, but deflations, it's a scary thing. And Japan was trapped for 30 years. So now the growth is back and inflation is back. I know we have been speaking about inflations for the past, since the pandemic, like people scared about inflations. But I think inflation is good. It's a good thing. It's like growth is also a good thing. The problem of Japan, as we know, it's the debt to GDP. And I think it's good for our audience to see maybe on the screen quickly to put Japan in the perspective of US and China, because a lot of discussions, as we know, it's very well known that Japan is above 250. So it's good to see the trajectory, because the thing is, how is the things going at the moment? And it's very important because US and the new administrations, I will say Trump 2.0, what they try to do. They try to reduce the debt in a very, I will say, hardcore way. And we know they fire people, civil servants, etc. Because they try to bring the growth and cut the debt. Japan did the same approach. They are reducing the debt and they are trying to bring inflations. So inflation is not so bad. And that's why the Central Bank of Japan at the moment is very contrariant compared to the other banks by really raising the rate to calm down the things, because also there is a lot of story on the carry trade side. As we know, we did a video last year in August when there's the unwind of the carry trade, and it was creating like a shock to the market. I mean, I invite you to watch this video for the one who are interested, because this shock wave brought a lot of volatility. At the moment, the market has already a lot of volatility because of the reforms Trump is trying to put in place. I think Japan was putting reform in place, but it was in a slow motion way. When Trump is like more, let's go, we have 100 days, let's go, and with the backup of Elon Musk cutting the things. So, but the objective at the end of the day, it's probably similar. Try to reform the things, reducing the debt, cutting the civil servant here, and reviving the growth. And definitely the Republicans are supporting this idea. So reducing the burden of the civil servants and like, okay, this is the free economy, let's go for it and let's boost the growth. So Japan, US has the same approach. I think China at the end of the spectrum is completely different the way they want to do the things. For many years, they have been supporting the economy with the governments backing up, and they will continue. So it's like we have a world with one side, we have Japan. On the other side, we have China. But I will say Japan is in the same direction than US, and already at a later stage, when US with Trump has early stage to reform the economy. But at the end of the day, like I say, Stock Basin as the US and US treasuries has the same and is an admirer of what Abe did in Japan.
And do you see any changes happening in relation to how Japan's growth has compared to the US and to China?
I mean, like I say, we put also on the screen here, the GDP's growth is still very low. We are like maybe 1%. I mean, you cannot compare because China has a target of 6%. US always has the target, also Stock Basin, 3%. So we are not in the same things, because China was like a growth engine for many years, reaching 6%, and US trying, especially since the COVID, boosting the economy. But I will say it was very modest in Japan with 1%. But I think it's very encouraging, and the reforms are really taking place. Now it's also a problem, the trajectory of the yen. The yen is very weak, boosting the tourists. But I think, like every country, you need to have a nice mix of tourists, but also having other part of the economy doing well.
So, Marc, in the last video, we spoke about the tech scene and the US versus China. Apart from tourism in Japan, do you see any other positive catalysts?
Yes, of course. I mean, we discussed about the semiconductor resurgence. I mean, as we know, in the 70s, 80s, and the 90s, Japan was a dominant player on the semiconductors, was also active on the foreign direct investments, because we know like Sony bought a lot of Hollywood studios in the 80s, and it was like creating a lot of protectionism in US because Japanese have been buying big time. I think like I say, in Japan, everything is going very slowly. It's a very conservative country. It's not like Trump 2.0, like we're cutting the debt, etc. But I think the semiconductors industry is already present because, like I say, um, they have been doing like photocopiers and etc. And it was a natural way to go in the direction of semiconductors. And I give you the example of Taiwan Semiconductors. Taiwan Semiconductors have been quite vocal in US to inject more money in the directions, and Trump was quite happy. But they also started to build up some manufacturing and they are already operational in Japan. If we put the workforce, everything is, I will say, put in perspective the US workforce and the Japanese workforce. I mean, of course, Japanese workforce, well disciplined, they are Asian, so very well disciplined. So obviously, the things are already ready to produce semiconductors. When in US, it's like, okay, this is a dream we want to do. They are already this. We know that TSMC has the manufacturing on the other side of Intel. We know that Intel was in trouble, and now they have a new CEO. So I think things take a lot of time in US, but in Japan, I will say everything is already prepared. And that's why we are quite convinced that Japan will continue, because it's a slow motion, structural is already placed. And it's, if we see on the term of the speed, like I say, in US, it's like fast speed, like the NASCAR car going very fast. When I will say in Japan, it's like more like the small mini car they have on the street going very slowly, if I want to illustrate this image. So I think, again, semiconductors, like I say, for us, an economy need to have several catalysts. Tourism, it's for sure, it's already present, plus the expo will boost the things. But I think semiconductors is already the case here. And slowly, semiconductors will dominate, because we are facing a problem. As we say on the last video, there is like a tech dominance, but also semiconductors. Not long time ago, there is the ASML, as we know, the crown jewel of Europe, has been challenging by the Chinese. They have a new machine in place for the most advanced semiconductors. So I think probably here Japan can play a role and going in the directions, because we cannot think about semiconductors. We put Europe on the side, but it's like the big player is, of course, it's US and China, but Japan has something to say here.
And do you see any other key drivers that could potentially drive a comeback for Japan in the semiconductor industry?
Yes, I mean, like I said, they can position themselves as a dominant, and clearly, like I say, I think US need Japan. They need Japan. It's interesting because we didn't see any discussions about the trade war. Trump was quite silent. He's attacking Canada, Mexico, Europe, as we know, putting, I will say, Europe in the front of the wall because of the military spending, the NATO, and etc. But he was very, very silent about Japan. So clearly, they know Japan is here. It's not only Trump. I will say already Obama administrations was putting in the directions, withdrawing troops in Europe and putting troops more in the Pacific Oceans. And of course, the big ally of US in the region is Japan. So that's another thing. But this is a pivotal thing, what Obama and obviously is also doing the same with Trump.
And Mark, how are any strategic partnerships with Japan playing out?
But that's the things. I mean, we can think about the military. The F-35. The Japanese government was one of the first one to buy the F-35. At the moment, there is a lot of discussion in Europe because the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Germans, they maybe don't want to participate because of the switch on the F-35. But you don't hear this kind of things in Japan. I think Japan was a very, very strong ally of US since the end of the Second World War and will continue. And this partnership, it's also on what I'm saying here. If you think about how military is been set up, they call in Japan the auto defense, and it's already in place. Slow reform, like I say, but even in the military, like for example here in Europe, like suddenly Germany is like changing the constitutions. We need to be in front of the world to do act, when Japan for the past decade already have the most sophisticated weapons in partnership with US. For example, the F-16 who have been building up. They have been building up a special versions of the F-16 with Mitsubishi Industry. So it's already quite a deep relationship. This is the relationship we are missing in Europe. We have been buying the F-35, but the relationship is not like we are partner like the F-16 with Mitsubishi Heavy Industry working to work on the F-16. So we are missing this link in Europe when Japan has this link at several levels, from a military, but also from a company side. They have experience because like in the 80s and before also at the end of the 90s, a lot of Japanese company have been bought some American companies, so they know how's the things. This is the missing link we have between Europe and Japan.
So, Mark, speaking about the US and Japan,
Mm-hmm.
Warren Buffett, what does his confidence in Japan tell us about Japan?
Yes, we did already a few videos on the questions, and I think at the moment is not very happy, I will say, and is disinvesting in US. We know that he was taking also sanctions, I will say, with Bank of America, reducing his exposure with also Apple, which we can imagine it's a concern, knowing that China is one of the biggest market, and we see what is in the pipeline of Apple. I think he's very convinced and continuing to increase his exposure to Japan for the past 2 years, especially is investing on the franchise. I think it's something, a concept we understand quite well here in Malta, the concept of the franchise, because we are also on an island like in Japan. So if you think about different franchise, you need to pass through some things, like a trading house. So he's continuing. I think he's very confident on the structural reform that's been taking in place in Japan, and he sees some growth there. And it's very interesting because, like I say, we always say he has nothing to prove at his age. And clearly here, he see like a strong bet. We know that he's a value investor. He's here to stay. He's probably saying he see value there. I mean, we have been concerned, and the world is concerned by the stock market, the US stock market. We have been discussing also in our previous video. I think since there is already several corrections, I will say, and could be continue when more in between, I will say. So clearly here on a long bet, Warren Buffett is very happy to be present in Japan, and he will continue to invest. He's been issuing bonds denominated in yen. So I think it's a big sign. It's a big sign for value investors. Maybe it's not like a temporary story here. It's something here to stay, to invest in Japan. I think it's clearly the message here.
And you hinted at it, Mark. Warren Buffett structured the investment quite intelligently. Can you tell us a bit about how he structured that investment using debt and all of these sort of things?
Yes, I mean, the way, I mean, he's been issuing debt in the same way, like to finance, not I mean, he doesn't want to increase the equity, that's for sure. We know that, for example, Warren Buffett is not paying any dividend because he's reinvesting on the business. So for him, it's to neutralize the things in the way, if you have an investment in yen, you issue also in yen. So you neutralize the things because you don't want to take a risk. If you are based, for the case of Warren Buffett, his consolidated currency is dollar. So he doesn't want to take an extra risk. So he's trying to finance his operation in Japan with a debt in Japanese yen. So clearly this is the smart way. So he's trying to avoid like any financial mechanism here to put like, because you can bet also on the hedge. I think it's also interesting to see that the yen was being quite strong, especially, like I say, as we say before, the Bank of Japan was increasing the rate when the rest of the world, and especially Canada, Bank of Canada, and Bank of Switzerland, or the SNB, has been cutting the rate. So clearly there is something going on. Well, even the government is sending a signal. I mean, the central bank normally is always sending a signal. If you are cutting the rate, it's like you are in the rush to maybe save your economy. We're talking about also, like I say, New Zealand, who's in a big trouble. So clearly here you see something in Iran, and it could be that the Central Bank of Japan will be the last standing man. We have a lot of discussions because last time Powell in his discussions at the Fed was like, okay, the discussion is it stopping the quantitative tightening? So he will not cut the rate. That was the message here, but quantitative tightening. So it's been like it's a liquidity story at the moment. So a lot of people have been like waiting, like more liquidity is coming into the market, especially in the direction of the Fed. When in Japan is the opposite, they still like in standby. I think the new Prime Minister of Japan also give a strong message here. They are fighting. Recently, he gave a message that deflation, it's not far away. Japan will continue to fight this I would say this shadow, and it was quite clear. So they want to continue the effort on that side. So deflation is still, I mean, if you have been in Japan for 30 years, deflation is near the corner, and it's not just like 2-3 years will change. But clearly here the message, there is a structural reforms, very similar, like I say, and making a parallel with US, except the speed. Let's see. I mean, I say a lot of people are concerned what's going on in US. Yes, the pain could be very painful in the short term, but in the long run, it could bring something better. I'm talking about US, which is already the case in Japan.
And Mark, Merill stands for risk management. What is it that Warren Buffett's confidence in Japan teaches us about risk management? What is he telling us about Japan?
It's telling us like to invest in the long run, not take excessive risk. Like I say, financing yen investment with a debt in yen, not thinking about extra layers of hedging, even if you are consolidated in dollar. So clearly here is like really betting on the things. He's betting on the business and not any complex, I will say, we often on certain product on the complex structures and you get lost like a black box style. I think he wants to be direct on the things and go for it. So clearly on the risk management side, this is also our philosophy here. And if you see our standard deviations, they are really lower. They are quite low at the moment, and we always continue to keep these things in mind. And risk management, it's clearly a priority for us, like Warren Buffett.
Thank you, Mark. Make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, make sure to leave them in the comment section below. Check out our LinkedIn and even our website at merillfunds.com. And we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thank you.
Thank you very much.